Your brain cells really have this notion of supply and demand. It's under so much demand every day, from work stress to environmental stress. But if you have a lot of supply through ketones and through sleep, through exercise and through hydration, then you're going to be able to meet the demands. If we have no supply, that's when we experience that synaptic loss and that neurodegradation. So myokines are muscle-based proteins. I refer to your muscles as the pharmacies and the myokines as the medications. And they're just stored in there. They get released under contraction. So you can imagine you contract your bicep, they go into the bloodstream. They have multiple effects on immunity, on cancer, and we can see greater effects on executive functions. Exercise is fundamentally the most important tool that we have for staving off Alzheimer's disease. And then it goes to sleep, and then it goes into nutrition. Everything you do, every choice you make every day is changing your epigenetics. And with Alzheimer's disease, we know that a strong component is really reliant upon the lifestyle habits that you engage in every day.
Louisa, you've coined the phrase that what's good for your heart is good for the brain. Let's start with the connection there.
Yeah, well, look, to be completely honest, when you look at the brain as a whole, we know it to be the most vascular rich organ in the entire body. That means that it houses the most amount of blood vessels per organ in the body, which means it's a hungry organ, right? But how do we get blood flow to the brain? It's through the heart. So my area of expertise, Jesse, is really in the Alzheimer's space. But if you go into, I subspecialize really in exercise and mild cognitive impairment. And I'm really deep in the weeds of that. And what we see across the board, across the thousands upon thousands of articles that have been published, is that what is good for the heart is good for the brain. And if you can maintain this cardiovascular rich lifestyle, then we know that you're benefiting the brain in many ways, both from a vascular perspective, but also when we think about the cardiovascular system, a lot of people are thinking about, plaque buildup and cardiovascular disease and how do I maintain my lipid profile. That's good for the brain as well.
Well, let's start off talking about some of the biggest needle movers when it comes to health for the brain and the heart, and then we can trickle down into the details.
Oh, well, look, we can touch on exercise, but I must warn you that once I get on my tangent, it's going to be very hard to get off of that. But we have this pyramid at Neuroathletics, which is my company that we talk about. And it's like the pyramid of high performance or the pyramid of peak brain health. And at the bottom of that pyramid is exercise. And we can go into that because there's 3 types that I talk about. Once we move up the pyramid, it's sleep, because you'd think, well, how does sleep even affect my cardiovascular system? It very much does, and it definitely affects your brain and neural pathology and also the cognitive functioning of our brain. And then we move up the pyramid, and right on top sits nutrients, the foods that we're putting in our body. I then talk about accessories, which move the needle slightly. Okay, these accessory items are fun and exciting, but they're not completely 100% necessary. You're thinking your ice bath, your sauna, things like that are not the be all and end all approach, but they are like the icing on the cake. So we can go through and talk about any one of these.
Well, let's start with your area of expertise in the foundation here, exercise, and we'll open that up generally, and then we'll move into some nuance.
Yeah, and exercise is so broad, right? Because when you look at the recommended guidelines, it states that the physical activity guidelines as set by the CDC state that we should be doing at least 150 minutes to 300 minutes of physical activity per week. And when I think about that, I think, I'm in the Alzheimer's space. So I'm generally looking at patients around, let's say 60 and above. And I look at my mother who doesn't have the disease. However, I look at my parents a lot as guinea pigs. And my mother says to me, but Louisa, I did my physical activity. I put the clothes on the line. And I'm like, there's got to be a problem there in our nomenclature. So let's start off with understanding exercise doesn't mean anything above a sedentary state. Right now, you and I are in what we call zone 1. And we are sedentary right now. I'm talking about actual exercise where you are huffing and you are puffing. This is what's going to feed your brain with that oxygen-rich blood, which is also delivering nutrients to your brain. So let's categorize exercise first and foremost. We've got aerobic exercise, we've got resistance training, and then we've got neurocognitive. And all of them serve a purpose as it relates to both the brain and the heart, and also all-cause mortality, really. So let's look at aerobic activity or aerobic exercise. That's your long bouts of exercise. Generally, you're doing around 45 minutes to an hour. I engage in aerobic activity about 3 to 4 hours a week, and I'm a runner, so I run a lot. And we know that this offers many benefits in terms of brain health. Okay, so let's look at that. One thing that we know from, first of all, this was first coined back in the 1960s. Marion Diamond, who's a wonderful neuroscientist, she actually did the first ever study where she showed when you take mice and you separate these two mice, you get two groups. You've got a cohort group and then you got this other sham group. What she did was she put these one set of mice in an enriched environment where it was like a wonderland, right? There was wheels for them. There were little weights. They were running around. They were really active. They had friends. And then you got this other group where it just had nothing, no sunlight, no wheels, no nothing. What she found in 1962, I think it was, she found that the mice after 6 months that were able to get on the wheel for an hour long at a time, and the ones who exercised the most at that zone 2 aerobic pace were able to grow new neurons, which are brain cells, in the hippocampus of the brain. So that was the birth of the literature around exercise and brain health. So when we are doing aerobic activity, just think that we are fertilizing the brain with this fertilizer called BDNF, and that's what gets really produced during aerobic activity. BDNF is a growth factor. It's a neurotrophin as well. And it helps with the growth and proliferation of neurons. So we can grow new neurons in a specific area of the brain, but not just that, it helps with the synapses. So let's just take a bit of a neuroscience 101 right now. Your brain is 3.5 pounds and it's got around 87 billion neurons. They are our chief brain cell, the only electrically active brain cell. And per neuron, we've got around 5 to 10,000 connections. And the connections are via these little legs, I would call them, called dendrites. And once they communicate with one another, they produce a synapse. And that's how we think, process information, have sound thoughts, and be able to talk and move. So neurodegeneration occurs, or Alzheimer's disease occurs, because those connections are actually lost. So we can grow new connections per neuron as we exercise through BDNF.
Got it. So it's not creating new neurons. It's impacting in a positive way the connections between them.
Yeah, and that's a huge myth, Jesse, because what I hear a lot about is the word neurogenesis. And I'll make it really clear. Neurogenesis does not exist in the human adult brain. We can see it in mice. We know that, but we are not mice. So we can't do it. The only place that we can is in the hippocampus. And this is a wonderful structure. It's deep in the temporal lobes. Your temporal lobes sit just behind the ear. And within there, you've got 2 on each side, and this is arguably the first structure to go during neurodegeneration. But what we see from aerobic physical activity or aerobic exercise alone, we not only grow the neurons in there, but we grow the connections of the neurons on the subregions of the hippocampus, and we can also make the hippocampus bigger in volume, so it can house more of those neurons. And the hippocampus is primarily involved in memory formation and learning. So that's the first thing to go during Alzheimer's disease. We see the loss of episodic memory and the loss of our short-term memory. Think, where did I leave my keys? What's that person's name? What's the street? Or, sometimes it happens to me, right? I'll if I'm really stressed, I'll know I need to do something. I'll walk into a room and then I'll be like, what did I come in here for? but it's like that, but compounded. So we can slow the progression and onset of this disease through exercise.
Okay, so this is aerobic exercise.
This is aerobic
and what
exercise.
Is the sweet spot per week
so
for
you
that specific type of exercise?
Yeah, look, this scares a lot of people, but you generally want to be doing around 3 hours a week. And it's actually 3 by 1 hour efforts, not, even though we can get great benefits from doing 30 minutes a day. We've seen this, especially in cancer research, which we can go over. Actually, 30 minutes, a minimum of 30 minutes a day of aerobic-based physical activity or aerobic-based exercise can reduce your risk of 13 types of cancer. So we're seeing great areas there. But as it relates to mitochondrial health and better lactate shuttling in the brain, you generally want to be doing at minimum 1 hour a week, 3 times a week. And the sweet spot in terms of heart rate and zones is around 65% of your maximum heart rate, which would put you in zone 2.
And just to give a subjective idea of what that would look like, if you're walking with a friend, you'd have to be walking at quite a steady pace to reach that point, correct?
That's correct. I love walking, by the way. I don't discredit it. However, if you are fit, you're probably not going to get those benefits. You want to ramp it up a bit, maybe do a light jog.
All right. Well, let's move into other types of exercise.
Yeah.
Going into resistance training.
Well, let's actually move into maximal aerobic exercise. That's where you're hitting your peak. In these 5 training zones, you're generally hitting that 5th zone. I call it the spew sessions because we used to call it that when I was a triathlete training full time. It's when you're going at that hard aerobic pace. Now, this is phenomenal for 2 reasons, mainly for the heart. Right. So we mentioned what's good for the heart is good for the brain. Since the heart is what is delivering the oxygen and nutrients to the brain via blood flow, we have to ensure that the heart and the cardiovascular system is strong, durable, and really flexible. So it's got great elasticity. So during maximal aerobic exercise, we can actually reverse the heart-related decline that we see as we get older by 20 years. And I'll tell you why. There was a really wonderful study done by a cardiologist by the name of Ben Levine, where he took a group of 50-year-olds and he subjected them to maximal aerobic exercise. He did this for around 3 to 4 hours a week, so it was pretty strenuous, but you get the idea. Over the course of 2 years, he did an echocardiogram, he did all the imaging. And this was a randomized controlled trial. It's a gold standard in academic research. What he found was that he reversed the age-related decline in the heart by 20 years, essentially giving these 50-year-olds a 30-year-old heart. And that is phenomenal because even at the age of 30, we see a decline in both our brain volume, just happens, but also in our heart, we are subjected to left ventricular hypertrophy, and we also get stiffening of the arteries. Our left ventricle supplies the blood to the rest of the body. And then our ventricles, our arteries get stiffer, which means that not a lot of blood flow can go through those. So essentially through maximal aerobic activity, really putting yourself under mild bouts of stress, you are not only remodeling the heart to make it stronger and more durable, but you're opening up the left ventricle to allow for more blood flow to the brain per minute of you. So yeah.
And what did you call it? A spew session?
Yeah.
What would that look like? Talk about what type of workout that would be. Just give us an idea.
I do it once a week, and the minimum requirement for this is 20 minutes a week, and I do them in a 4x4 effort. So lately, I either do it on a run track, so I'll set my timer and I will run as hard as possible, and I'll keep going for 4 minutes. The reason why it's called a spew session is because when you get to that 4th set, so 4 minutes on, 4 minutes off of complete rest, when you get to that 4th set, you actually feel like you're going to vomit. I don't know if you've ever done a session like this, but we used to do them in the water. We used to do them on the bike, and I would actually feel like I was going to vomit.
So would another term for this be a HIIT type workout then? Doing sprints?
You know what? I wouldn't say that because HIIT is predominantly high effort. Well, it depends on like what the effort is. But if it's a 20 seconds at maximal and then 5 minutes off. I mean, I don't know what HIIT training really entails. HIIT training is great, but it's not there to serve as a purpose of increasing VO2 max. And your VO2 max is a measure of your peak cardiorespiratory fitness. And we see that you can raise it a little with HIIT, but you're going to raise it like tenfold with this 4x4 effort.
Okay, so the subtle difference there is that you're not pushing as hard as a HIIT session, but you're going for longer?
Correct.
Okay. And you said in this study where people reversed the age of the heart, they did how many minutes of that per week? It seemed like a lot.
Yeah, they were subjected to around 3 hours of maximal efforts per week. Now, this was done like, it was a study designed, specifically to look at that. But we still know that you can still get the benefits from doing at minimum 20 minutes. I would love to do 40 minutes a week, but I just don't have the time. And it does take a long time to recover.
All right. Any other different pieces within cardio we want to focus in on before we go into resistance training?
Well, look, I think what's also notable in that aspect, right? When you are getting the sheer force of blood shunting through your body at maximal efforts, right? Imagine this, you've got this tube of water and it's like a hose, right? And you've got it on maximum. It's shooting out. That's what your arteries are going through when you are in that maximal zone. What we've seen in terms of the cancer research, and I love this area, although I'm in Alzheimer's disease, by trade, I'm an intraoperative neurophysiologist. So I go into surgeries and they're mainly oncological surgeries. So I look a lot at the oncology literature. And what we see is that when we have a tumor, for example, in stage 1 cancer, and you've got a tumor that has formed in a specific site in the body, the way that it metastasizes is pieces of that tumor break off. And what we call this is circulating tumor cells. We know that through maximal aerobic exercise, we can get rid of these circulating tumor cells through the sheer force and shunting of the blood through the system. So I would tell everybody that this is not just a way to increase brain health, increase heart health, but it can also act as an anti-cancer medication or protocol, if you will.
And that's for the
maximal
high intense bouts that are a little bit longer than HIIT.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Got it. Just to get a little bit more nuance in that realm. So the cancer cells are already formed, they're in circulation, and then doing this type of exercise, what happens to them? What's the physiology there?
They just get shunted through the blood and they die off. And another thing, an important thing to note here is, and we're going to go into this more so in the resistance training, what we see is that through the use of myokines, they're muscle-based proteins, but BDNF is also a myokine. They're these hormones that get secreted from the muscle, and we can get them secreted during maximal exercise as well, and small bouts of it during aerobic, right? Because they get released when your muscles are contracting. You get more of them in resistance training. But through specific myokines, especially one called IL-6 and IL-10, what they do is they send signals to natural killer cells, and these natural killer cells are the things that can actually dampen the circulating tumor cells and from the tumor from actually progressing. Because tumors are alive. They also form their own vascular system. So we have to kill off that site. You have to kill off that vascular system in order to kill off the actual tumor and stopping it from going from stage 1 to stage 2.
All right. Well, this is a good segue into resistance training, the
yeah.
myokine piece. Let's talk about, we'll go from the top down and we'll move into myokines a bit more. But what are the benefits specifically for the brain of regular resistance training?
Oh, gosh. Well, the bigger the legs, the bigger the brain, apparently. That's a great analogy, right? Because what we see is that there's a wonderful study that was first done to show that people who have bigger quads have bigger brains. And so when I say bigger brains, let's talk about what that means. We've got both gray matter and white matter in the brain. The gray matter is predominantly our cortex, and that whole houses the cell bodies. Then the white matter is the myelinated part of the neuron. That's the axon of the neuron. When we talk about greater sizes in volume as it relates to the brain, what we're really talking about is you're getting more connections between the brain. And that's what we see on neuroimaging. So we've seen, and this is a paper that I authored. I was the first author on a wonderful paper that was released around 9 months ago now that showed that resistance training specifically can slow the decline of mild cognitive impairment. So what we see, and this was across two main studies, it was called the SMART study and the brain power study. What we saw is that whether you've got mild cognitive impairment or not, through resistance training at minimum of 2 days a week, you can increase the gray matter volume and you can decrease white matter lesions, because we can get lesions in the white matter of our cells. So how does this happen? Well, first and foremost, it happens through myokines. So myokines are muscle-based proteins. I refer to your muscles as the pharmacies and the myokines as the medications. And they're just stored in there. They're waiting to get released, and they get released under contraction. So you can imagine you contract your bicep, they get released, they go into the bloodstream. And then we have receptors on all of our organs. We have receptors in our brain. We have receptors in your prostate, which was a great study that was done in Cell Press we can talk about. You've got receptors on your heart that are waiting for these myokines to go in there. And when these myokines are excreted, they have multiple effects on immunity, on cancer, on our executive functioning. Our executive functioning lives in the prefrontal cortex of the frontal lobe of the brain. And that's responsible, that's the CEO of the brain. That is responsible for all of our functioning, from thinking, processing speed, memory, intellect, etc. And we can see greater effects on executive functions through these myokines. We can also see an even more of an expression. One myokine specifically is called irisin. It's a messenger molecule. So it basically helps BDNF express itself. It delivers more BDNF. So that's another great tool. But quite specifically, I love the prostate cancer myokine research, where they showed that you can inhibit tumor cell growth in the prostate from myokines.
All right, just to understand the myokine piece in a really general sense, in the muscles, we have these myokines, and they sit there until we contract the muscle. Then they get ejected out into circulation and act on different areas in the body.
Yeah.
So does everybody have these myokines, even people that are sedentary, in the muscle waiting to be used?
They sure do.
And what happens if somebody doesn't use those? Do they become recycled? Do they just sit there indefinitely?
They just sit there.
I just want to talk about the spectrum here of somebody that's actually using them versus just sitting there.
Well, they just sit there. I mean, look, I don't think we've gone into that deep of the research to think like what happens to them. I mean, they're sitting there, they're waiting, but they don't get released unless you release them. Just to give you a picture of how important these are, pharmaceutical companies are spending billions upon billions of dollars trying to mimic these. The New York Post released this stupid article about a week ago now, saying that they've now figured out an exercise pill. They're really trying to replicate BDNF in a pill, but they just can't. Billions of researchers going into it. They just can't, because they know if they did, this would be the end of so many major diseases, but probably the end of exercise as well.
You mentioned the fact bigger the legs, bigger the brain. It gets me thinking about different muscles in the body and myokines. Are they dispersed more out from the legs, or is it in general throughout the whole body?
Yeah, look, it's dependent per vector size. So you've got to think of your quads. So your quads are 4. There's way more quad muscles. It literally lives in the myocytes. So there's more muscle fibers, more muscle cells in the quad than there are in the biceps. So there's more myokines that live in there. And then there's also another fact that I think we have to talk about. And this relates to cognitive decline in Alzheimer's disease. We know that there's a distinct correlation between type 2 diabetes and Alzheimer's disease. You know how the brain is able to uptake lactate and how able to uptake glucose. We know that that's impaired during mild cognitive impairment and these diseases. Mitochondria, the more efficient the mitochondria, I know you've had my good friend Casey Means on the podcast, and she probably spoke about mitochondrial dysfunction. Mitochondria in the brain serves as a really really important purpose. And we know that through exercise, we can improve mitochondrial efficiency, but the more muscles that we have, the bigger the muscle, the more mitochondria we have. So you're effectively doing so many things than just secreting myokines, right?
When it comes to myokines, I do want to leave them soon, but just to get the full picture here, when we're walking, are those being extracted from the muscle, or what kind of force is needed over what period of time to get maximal dose?
Yeah, that's a great question, because we can see that we can get some BDNF, but let's just say there's around 1,000 myokines, right? Predominantly when you're walking and when you're running, you're only really secreting BDNF, and mild lactate is one, and cathepsin B and IL-6. But to get the true benefits, you do have to lift heavy, and heavy means around 80% of your one repetition max. So let's think, right? You're doing a deadlift, and let's just, for argument's sake, let's say your one repetition max, that's the maximum that you can lift in one rep, is 100 kilos. You want to make your exercise sessions based around that. So you want to be looking at around lifting 80 kilos for 6 reps for 4 sets, 2 to 3 times a week. That makes sense. And that's, by the way, Jesse, that's hard. Like 80% of your one repetition max. I don't know if you've done that, but like just squatting that is really hard to do.
Yeah, it's not doing air squats and pull-ups and push-ups. You really got to push it.
And look, that's where, this is my issue. Being a woman, also seeing my mother, right? You know what she did, Jesse? We have a strict rule, and they live in Australia, a strict rule. Like I tell them, I'm not coming home for Christmas unless I see like some work being done in the gym. So mum went out and bought weights on her own so she could really be like, look, I'm doing what you say. I looked at the weights, and this was on Zoom. They were pink, and I swear they were like 2 kilos. I was like, that's not doing anything. And it pains me to see women, and probably men too, going into the gym and lifting these tiny weights that are just not doing anything for them. You have to lift heavy. And then we can go into probably the myths around this. But a lot of women think, if I lift heavy, I'm going to become a bodybuilder. And it fascinates me, because I'm like, I try so hard to put muscle on. I lift heavy. I guarantee you're not going to be putting a lot of muscle on. Just get to the gym 3 times a week.
All right. So other than myokines, other benefits people get from resistance training?
Well, increases in strength and hypertrophy. A really great study that came out of China that showed that as little as a 10% difference, asymmetric difference in hand grip strength, which was measured via something called a dynamometer, which measures your hand grip strength. This is a proxy for overall strength. You have mild cognitive impairment. So basically, what you're thinking about doing when you go to the gym is not just, I'm going to get improvements in body composition. You're also increasing strength. Strength is so necessary as we age across the board for both men and women. The CDC put out a statement saying that the number one cause of death amongst 80-year-olds is falls. So when you are strength training, you're strengthening all areas and all facets of life, right? You're preventing falls, you're increasing muscle mass, you're increasing strength, you're increasing brain size, you're helping with your neuromuscular system. We have the reason why we can lift and push is not because of your muscles, it's because of your brain. And we have this connection, the neuromuscular system at the neuromuscular junction, right? So if your brain sends a signal down to your upper motor neurons or your lower motor neurons in order to lift heavy things. If you stop doing that, you lose that signaling from the brain. You lose it. You just do not, and it's very hard to recruit it back again. You almost never do that. And your brain kind of has this theory, use it or lose it. And the reason why we seep into cognitive decline as we age is because we stop engaging in things such as this, things that are hard for us, things that are difficult for us. So I think that resistance training is like a panacea for overall health.
For somebody that has neglected this area up until this point and say they're 40, 50, 60, and their interest is piqued hearing about the different benefits from the different kinds of exercise, what would be the most simple way to break down what we've explained to this point into a program for people? And also, additionally, is there anything else in the exercise realm we want to add to that?
The great news is the more sedentary and less fit you are, the greater benefits you're going to get to start with. So we can see benefits with 70-year-olds who have never lifted a weight before getting the same benefits that I would in terms of percentage, right? From doing a wall squat, just, or air squats really, or walking. My theory is you've just got to start, right? You've just got to start. If you are either overweight, BMI is super high, you're really unfit, start with walking, 15-minute walking around the block, right? I'm not going to even get into the psychological aspect of this because I know that it's hard. I understand it's hard to get out there. I'm not going to get into the motivation. However, you just have to start. And you don't even have to go in and start lifting weights. Actually, probably the worst thing you could do from a psychological factor is go and lift heavy weights to start with. Start by can you do an air squat? Can you do a push-up? That's the first thing. Calisthenics is great. And then you want to work your way up. And you generally want to work in around 6-week efforts, right? Because that's what generally when, I don't know how you categorize your routine, Jesse. Like, I don't know if you up your weights every 6 weeks, but, hopefully you've got a training adaptation and you want to increase it over the next 6 weeks. So that's how I generally start with beginners as well. Just do what you can. And then what's really great, I bought these for my parents, whether they're using them or not, are resistance bands. They're fantastic.
But coming back to the myokines, we're talking to the beginner here with a lot of this. They're not going to get a lot of those benefits.
Not to start with.
Like you mentioned, you have to get to, was it 80% of your maximum to get those fully expressed?
Fully expressed, yes. However, don't forget, you're still getting the BDNF from getting out there and running. And that BDNF, we haven't even gone into Alzheimer's pathology. I don't know if you want to, but we do have research to show that we can get rid of these, eliminate. I've been trying to think of the word eliminate this whole episode. We can eliminate some of the plaques that are built up in Alzheimer's disease, which is amyloid beta, through BDNF.
Well, since you brought it up, let's talk about it. Let's talk about early cognitive decline and what's happening with the anatomy, physiology. And then over what period of time would somebody degrade to the point of Alzheimer's? And that'll give us the framework to talk about BDNF and how it can come in and change things.
Yeah, so Alzheimer's disease is the most prominent form of dementia. Dementia is the umbrella term that's used to categorize Parkinson's dementia, dementia with Lewy bodies, vascular dementia, etc. We know about Alzheimer's so much because 55 million people have it worldwide. That number is going to triple by the year 2050. And what we knew 20 years ago is very different to what we know now. 20 years ago, we were calling Alzheimer's disease the amyloid cascade hypothesis. That's because we knew that in Alzheimer's disease cases on neuroimaging, we could see a buildup of a certain protein. And that protein is called amyloid beta. And we all have that, right? So 20 years ago, they thought, well, if you've got a head full of amyloid beta, you've got Alzheimer's disease. Therefore, amyloid beta is the demon. But we now know that it's not the demon because it is there to serve and protect your brain. So why does it arise and where does it go wrong? In the presence of inflammation or an attack on your immune system, what happens is your body activates our primary immune defense system, which is the innate immune system, right? And in the presence of the innate immune system in our brain, for example, your brain says, Louisa is under attack. Louisa's always under attack because she lives in Manhattan. But Louisa's under attack. We're going to release amyloid beta because amyloid beta is a protective molecule. It protects our brain against attacks of the outside world. So it raises it and it's like, okay, she's under attack. Let's raise, it basically shields the brain from these insults. But Louisa's really great with her sleep. So Louisa goes to sleep every night at a reasonable hour. She sleeps 7.5 to 8 hours per night. During deep sleep, I wash out that amyloid beta. So it gets washed out and then it's clear the following day. And that's how a healthy, plastic, really good, flexible brain should be. But in the presence of mild cognitive impairment, which is a pre-dementia state, in fact, you get diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment around 20 to 30 years prior to an Alzheimer's disease diagnosis. I hate the word mild, Jessie, because I've spoken with tens of thousands of Alzheimer's patients, and let me tell you, there's nothing mild about that. If you've got mild cognitive impairment, it is horrific. You can't remember really anything. We've even got before MCI, we've got another pre-dementia state, which is called subjective cognitive impairment. That's when you're starting. That's, I would say, is starting in your 30s, which is quite scary. So you've got mild cognitive impairment, which then moves into Alzheimer's disease. Now, Alzheimer's disease is also characterized by another protein called tau, and that builds up in the neurofibrillary of the axon, right? And what happens is when that aggregates, it basically forms a tangle and it collapses the axon of the cell body. So you've got two things happening. You've got the protein building up inside the cell, and then you've got the amyloid, which is outside of the cell. And if it's outside of the cell, it doesn't allow for the proper functioning of these two cells to communicate with each other. So you're losing synapses. You're losing those dendrites over time. They get washed away. We call it synaptoclastic. I don't know if you've heard of blastic and clastic, but blast is basically the creation of it. So that's a pretty scary process. And the scariest thing about all of this is that we don't have a cure for it. We still don't know what causes it, even though I've told you, partly that's what we know. And all of the FDA approved drugs like lecanemab and donanemab and aducanumab, these are all actually really serious drugs that when you do have them, they cause brain bleeds and volume loss. We see tissue loss in these patients who are having it. So it's a pretty scary position to be in.
All right, now let's bring BDNF in. You mentioned how it has potential there to impact the plaques. Talk about that connection.
Yeah, so when these plaques are formed, they're formed because the amyloid starts to become sticky and they form these plaques, if you will. But even before that, when they're just up there circulating in the brain, serving and protecting the brain, through BDNF, through the expression of BDNF and blood flow, you can eliminate these the amyloid from even becoming the plaque that it does.
Got it. And then you mentioned sleep too. If you're getting a proper sleep, that can be part of removal in a different way.
The biggest part, if you will, during our deep slow wave sleep, which is stage 3 sleep, you're really getting the clearance of not just amyloid, you're getting the clearance of the toxins that build up during the day, environmental toxins that are just circulating in the air. I know microplastics are of big concern right now. We're even seeing microplastic build up in the brain, which is scary because it means it's crossed the blood-brain barrier and they're in there. But during deep slow wave sleep, our brain acts like a washing machine and our cerebral spinal fluid pretty much washes the brain and it takes with it the debris and it takes with it amyloid beta. So that's the best time to be cleaning the brain.
So other than your basic sleep hygiene, what do we need to know in regards to sleep in connection to Alzheimer's to make sure we're getting the most out of that time?
Look, you have to ensure you're getting into deep sleep. So what does that mean? Well, I think we have to take an approach of overall health, right? Sleeping at the same time every day, we know. Sleeping in a cool, dark room, fantastic. What you want to ensure that your body is 2 degrees lower than your maintenance level. But then ensuring that you're not doing anything to block deep sleep, such as or certain medications, certain SSRIs can block sleep, but sometimes we can't help that. But light exposure, activation of our sympathetic nervous system through stress can kick us out of sleep. alcohol. I mean, if you want a healthy brain and you're drinking, I mean, that's first and foremost, right? That's basically like, I don't even want to go there really. Okay. Eliminating alcohol, eliminating cigarettes, eliminating any form of drug and marijuana. Like, we want to be ensuring that we are getting deep, enriched sleep at night.
Well, I think we better go to alcohol, because I know from that reaction, and I've heard you on other shows talk about how little it actually takes to disrupt sleep.
Oh, yes.
And because there is this paradox of, people saying that having wine is healthy and there's certain longevity benefits, and then people like you that are saying it's terrible for our sleep and it's something to be avoided, talk about how you see it in relation to brain health.
I think to myself, if you do want a healthy performing brain, why would you be at the mercy of alcohol? You're putting yourself at a disservice in multiple ways. First of all, you've got to think about what alcohol is. Like, why does it make us, whatever it makes you, happy, drowsy, whatever it is? It's because the active ingredient ethanol is actually a toxin. It is a neurotoxin, but it's also it's also a cell toxin. It basically turns into acetaldehyde, and acetaldehyde is pretty much weed killer, if I'm not mistaken. I believe you put it on your grass to kill things. So it is an actual poison. And so it poisons your body, it poisons your cell. And what we've seen is that we get greater volume loss. So you are killing the gray matter of your brain. You are increasing white matter lesions. Let's just for a second talk about white matter, for example. So 80% of autoimmune diseases are in females. And let's look at multiple sclerosis, for example. When we do, you go and see a neurophysiologist, for example, you're doing something called an EMG, an electromyography. And what we're doing is we're actually testing the axon. We're testing conduction velocity against the actual neuron. And we're testing how long does it take you to produce a muscle contraction or a thought. That's where our myelin lives. We're testing the myelin. And in multiple sclerosis, we'll see something called a complete conduction block or slow conduction velocity. That means the white matter is either deteriorating or it's just completely gone. You are adding to that when you drink. When I say white matter lesions, you are forming little lesions within the white matter, the myelin sheath of the axon. So you are slowing down the conduction velocity of your thoughts, of your information processing speed, of your movements, essentially just increasing your chances of autoimmunity diseases. So there we've got that problem there. But then you've got the problem of ethanol actually acting as a sedative. It actually sedates you. It doesn't help you sleep. I understand that it activates the parasympathetic nervous system. It kind of makes you drowsy. So people think it makes you calmer. It lowers your inhibition. And sometimes that can be a great thing, but that doesn't mean it's helping you sleep. So then you've got this reversal effect. You're blocking yourself from sleeping. Because you're not sleeping, you're not clearing out the amyloid beta. And then we know that a head full of amyloid can block us from sleeping. So you've got this loop, never-ending loop.
Any other foods or drinks in that realm people might be considering healthy and having that negative impact on the brain?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I often get asked, so Louisa, if I have to drink, what's the healthiest drink for me? I'm like, that doesn't make sense. I'm not sure of any other. I mean, if you're
like
leaning towards caffeine, I knew you were going to say that. No, I don't. I'm on the bandwagon of, I put out a reel that went into 6 different studies that can show that caffeine serves as a benefit for the brain. Not in massive doses, obviously, and it does have a half-life. So I always say to keep your caffeine prior to 12 p.m. so it doesn't affect sleep. But I don't know about any other drinks.
Okay. And we're going to get into food later. I want to stay in sleep for now. How do you feel about naps? Somebody who has a bad night's sleep, hopefully not because of alcohol, but alcohol or otherwise, they're feeling tired the next day, decide to nap. How does that play into brain health for that time, and then later on when they go to sleep at night that night?
Yeah. And look, I toy with this a lot. So I work one-on-one with elite players, elite athletes, and depending on their workload, I'll get them to have a nap. But essentially what you're doing with a nap is you're taking away from your sleep pressure. I try and caution against it, because if you sleep during the day, it might be really great for you, but you're not going to be able to sleep as well at night. And what we know is that you want to be sleeping at the same time every day. Sleep regularity is now sitting at the utmost importance for sleep fitness and sleep health. So unless you are extremely sleep deprived and you're going to nap for a small amount of time, like 20 minutes, let's just say, okay, that's great. But I would definitely try and keep your sleep for sleep at night.
Any tips for somebody who is feeling a midday crash, whether it be, lack of sleep the night before or stressful day or whatever, other than caffeine, potentially having a short nap? What do you recommend to somebody to charge up the brain and revive midday if they're feeling down and low energy?
Honestly, I mean, let's just say you are well hydrated through the use of electrolytes, because electrolytes, right? When we sweat, we don't just sweat out water, we're sweating out selenium, potassium, sodium. These are actual electrolytes that your cells need to function. When we produce a synapse, as I mentioned earlier, that chemical reaction, it utilizes something called a sodium potassium pump. So we sometimes drowsiness is a result of electrolyte loss. So maintaining electrolytes, that's the first thing. I always have electrolytes throughout the day, making sure that you are completely hydrated. If you can, get the shunting of blood to your brain. Whenever I'm extremely exhausted, I'm about to crash at my desk, I try my hardest to go outside and do a sprint or do 20 squat jumps. I don't know how well people would do.
I find breath work can be good to quickly bring the brain back into a place of being energized and focused.
Yeah, I love breath work. And look, if people want to meditate, that's great too. I do 10 minutes a day of breath work as well, and resonance frequency breathing, where I'm doing around 4 to 5 breaths per minute. That's shown wonders on my heart rate variability and on my stress levels as well.
Talk more about the meditation piece. This is a good one when it comes to brain health, and obviously you're an expert in this realm. Did you say you're doing 10 minutes of meditation a day?
See, I don't meditate per se, depending on what your definition of meditation is. I do. It's a bit insane what I do, but I try and block all my senses and just sit there and breathe. And I believe meditation is more of a trying to eliminate all thoughts, right? I don't do that. I just sit with whatever I have, but I do use earplugs. I use a eye mask, and I am just sitting there and I'm just focusing on breathing. That's all. But sometimes
is this the breath work too? Or
that is my breath work. Yeah. I don't specifically do meditation. I mean, that might be a form of meditation, but I'm not actively sitting there trying to eliminate thoughts.
You mentioned HRV. Talk about what that is and how we can use that as a tool when it comes to health and well-being.
So heart rate variability is a measure of how fit and recovered we are. I use this quite often on myself. Every morning, I've got I track and measure my sleep. And the first thing I look at is heart rate variability and my sleep score. So it's pretty much the time between your heartbeat intervals. So it's basically trying to see a variation between your sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. So I always do this seesaw effect, right? Throughout the day, we want a high variation of both actively engaging in our sympathetic, which is our fight or flight response, but also our parasympathetic, which is our rest and digest. So sympathetic is activated when we are running away from a tiger, when we are stressed, when we're at the gym. So it can be both good and bad. But our parasympathetic is activated when we are resting, when we're asleep. And for a good, healthy cardiovascular system. You want to be flexible between the two. So basically is a measurement of how flexible is your cardiometabolic system with going between the two, going from sympathetic to parasympathetic. Now, if you have a low heart rate variability, that means that you did not have a high variation between the two. And that's not good. You don't want to be spending 24 hours a day in parasympathetic nervous system. You don't want to spend 24 hours a day in sympathetic nervous system. You really want a variation, a high variation between the two. And one of the best ways of helping your heart rate variability rise is through resonance frequency breathing. The next step after that is ensuring good quality sleep. Next step after that is doing everything you can in terms of eating good foods, staying hydrated, and not becoming too stressed mentally.
You mentioned measuring that. What tool do you use to get a reading?
So I'm using the Whoop. No, I'm not using the Whoop. I lie. I'm using the Oura Ring. And I also sleep on an 8-sleep mattress. It's a temperature controlled mattress, and that gives me my heart rate variability every morning as well. Look, I see mild differences between the two.
That's interesting. I was going to ask that. So obviously you're feeling like you're getting a pretty good idea of the data based on that.
Yeah. And I can see it. If I have a glass of red wine, my heart rate variability will plummet.
And when you can see it objectively, I'm sure it's more profound, the fact that you're going to be less likely to do that again. You know, we have subjective feelings, but seeing the data has got to be in your face, and all of us are more susceptible to change when we can see the numbers.
Oh yeah. That's why I love seeing it. Right. And look, what I've also found is that the earlier I sleep, so let's just say I go to bed at midnight and I sleep until 8 a.m. That's an 8-hour sleep. My heart rate variability will not be as high as if I slept from 10 p.m. till 6 a.m. So circadian rhythm plays a huge role in this as well. And I try and maintain a good sleep architecture at all times if I can. I do travel a lot, and that plummets my HRV too. I'm pretty sure it's because of the oxygen in the planes, but yeah.
When you get that data in the morning, you see your HRV is low and you had a bad sleep, how does that dictate changes you're going to make that day for recovery?
Well,
you talked about some of the things you can do to affect HRV, but for you personally, like, what will that do for you that day?
I will be more conscious, and basically I follow the principle of allotment and compound interest. So one night of sleep deprivation probably won't do anything harmful for your brain, but it's the compounded effects of that. So if I'm sleep deprived 4 nights a week ongoing, it's going to compound and have an effect on my brain. Likely if I have 1 glass of wine, maybe once a week, it probably won't do anything. We see the effects taking place at around 2 to 3 drinks per week and above. So I think to myself, okay, Louisa, you've woken up, you've got a low heart rate variability. What are we going to do today? What's the most important thing? The most important thing for me is always exercise. So if I'm going to exercise, then I'm probably going to go easy on everything else, maintaining a very low stressful environment. Sometimes it's hard, especially when you live in Manhattan and you've got a business and 10 staff members and everything else that life has to offer. But I think my health in allotments as well. It's like, well, how much can I have today? How much stress, right? If I can only have 70% because I've got a lower HRV as opposed to having a higher HRV, then I'll think, okay, I want to get that stress from exercise. So I'll do that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you look at it basically like your reservoir of what you have available, and you allot when you have less to exercise, knowing that you get a lot of benefit from that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's move into food and bring this into the brain, talking about the best way to eat for our brain and prevention of cognitive decline and Alzheimer's.
Yeah. When I talk about the brain, I think about the fact that it takes it's only 3.5 pounds, 2% of our total body weight, but consumes 20% of the total calories that we ingest. So it's a hungry and selfish organ, if you will. What does it take to have a healthy brain when it comes to food? There's a lot of misconceptions in this field in terms of, we know that dietary cholesterol cannot pass the blood-brain barrier. So cholesterol foods are not needed for the brain. But there are other foods such as your brain thrives on antioxidants and polyphenols. So the best food, in my opinion, first and foremost, are the antioxidant-rich fruits and vegetables. Think of blueberries, any type of berry. I love them. I have blueberries every single day. Then selenium, so Brazil nuts are really wonderful for the brain. But then if we move away from the polyphenol family and then we move into, and by the way, the reason why that's good is because they really help eradicate the oxidative stress that occurs on any given day. But then if we move into other things such as fatty fish, we can look at omega-3. So omega-3, which is predominantly made of EPA, DHA, and ALA, the total lipid component in the brain, which is around 20% of the total fat component in the brain. Your brain has a lot of fat in there. It's actually made of DHA. DHA comes from fatty fish. So ingesting, I'm under the guise of taking 2 grams of EPA and 2 grams of DHA per day. Sometimes I take more because I think that there is just so much to be said on the beneficial effects of omega-3 fatty acids. So feeding your brain with omega-3 fatty acids is really important.
Okay, so when you're supplementing with those, is that on top of what you're getting through the diet?
Well,
And
yeah.
what means, is that fish oil or algae oil, or what do you like to take?
Fish oil, because the ALA really has to convert into the EPA DHA. So I try and eliminate that. But the food sources is tricky, right? I love salmon and fatty fish, salmon, mackerel, sardines, but we've got to think about where it's sourced. And unless you're living on the outskirts of Ikaria, which is like this longevity Greek island, or Sardinia, right? And you're getting the fresh fish from the ocean. We have to think, where is our fish that we're getting, especially in the United States, right? It's farmed. Or, if you're getting wild caught, which I think is something that I don't know too much about. I don't know if that's entirely true that you're getting wild caught. You're not getting enough EPA, DHA. So you do have to supplement with this. And a really great thing for everybody to do, I do think that you can't optimize what you don't measure. Everyone should go out and get an omega-3 index test, which basically is a blood test. It's just a spot. You just literally pinprick your finger, send it off. It's so easy. And it measures the amount of omega-3 fatty acid in the red blood cell. And you can look at this and it'll give you an index, and it'll basically say that you are 5%, 6%. You want to be at an 8% or more. I'm at around 10.5. I'm trying to get it up. For some reason, I want to get it like to that of a dolphin, if you will, maybe 16%. But no, if you are part of the average or majority of Americans, you will get an omega-3 index of 4% or less, dramatically increasing your risk of all-cause mortality.
You talked about farm fish there. It gets me thinking about food quality as a whole.
Ugh, yeah.
How do you look at, when you're buying for yourself or people you're working with, buying organic, wild caught, grass-fed, grass-finished, food quality as a whole? Is that a priority for you?
Oh, absolutely. I was, my parents were born and raised in Cyprus. I'm Greek. I eat a lot of red meat, olive oil. I just found out as well that I think around 80% of the olive oil in the United States is cut with other oils, making it rancid. So I think everyone should be careful of that. But so I go to the markets on the weekend to get my fruits and vegetables. I have a butcher near me in the West Village that does not just grass-fed, but grass-finished as well. So I have my grass-fed and grass-finished meat. Fish is a tricky one. I'm not going to lie, even if you are getting the so-called wild caught fish in Whole Foods, for example, I'm not sure I believe it. And I did see something which scared me, which showed that they're actually injecting this fish with astaxanthin to help it with the coloring. So I would be wary of all of that.
How much fish do you eat in, say, a week?
Oh, I eat meat every day, some form of meat, but I do have around 70% plant-based, 70, maybe even 80% sometimes. I'm eating fish 3 times a week, whether it's salmon, whitefish. What's the fish that I have? In Australia, it's called snapper. I forget what it's called here, but I have it quite often.
Okay,
Branzino.
let's go to supplements. We know you're supplementing with your omegas. What else are you taking on a regular basis?
I am very well known for taking creatine. So creatine is a wonderful, wonderful supplement. It's the cheapest and most well-studied supplement on the market, the cleanest. It's a naturally occurring molecule in our body, in the liver, but we don't get enough of it to cater for what we need. And there's a twofold effect here, right? Over the last 50 years, we knew of creatine as being this bodybuilding drug, right? There's this supplement that is there to help you grow bigger muscles. And we knew it was good for the body, but we now have substantial evidence to show that creatine is great for the brain. Why is that? Because it helps with cell energy metabolism. Well, what does that mean? Well, within the cell, within the mitochondria, you actually produce ATP, which is the main energy current of the cell. When you eat food, it actually gets broken up into pieces, and when it goes through the mitochondria, we use the mitochondria, if functioning well, we use that for energy. We can actually help the mitochondria produce more energy through creatine because it helps produce it in that. So you're producing more cell energy in the brain. What does the literature say? Well, we've got preclinical studies to show the effects of creatine as a neuroprotective molecule. So it protects the neurons against what we call insults. Insults are things such as head trauma. So NFL athletes, they're doing studies where they're actually dosing them prior to the game with 20 grams of creatine. Now, if you're not getting hit in the head, you don't need to have this large of a dose. But that just shows that it acts as a protective barrier for the cells when they are going out and getting hit. But an insult, actually, Jesse, is also a stroke. Strokes are common in females as well, more common than men. So you can protect yourself against maybe suffering a stroke or getting any type of insult that occurs. Even an insult is like a headache or going outside and being insulted, if you will, by the toxins in the air. So you are protecting the brain in that instant as well. And then in terms of the twofold effect, you think about what it means as a woman as we get older and we go through that menopausal state. What's happening? Well, we have no estrogen being produced. And estrogen is one of those neurotrophins that is protective for the brain. We have estrogen receptors in our brain. But we also see that a lot of these women in the postmenopausal state are becoming osteopenic. So creatine can actually help with bone mass density. So you're also helping protect and serve the bone mineral density, I should say. Yeah.
Is there a standard dose you like to recommend to adults across the board?
Yeah. By the way, anyone can take this, and it doesn't matter what age you are. I always recommend like 12 years and up. And if you want the benefits from a physiological standpoint, meaning like a physical standpoint in your body, I say just have 5 grams a day, right? But if you want the cognitive benefits, you want to up it to around 10 to 12 grams. And that's because the bioavailability is generally lost when it crosses the blood-brain barrier. So you want to up that to around 10 to 12 grams per day. And it doesn't degrade in heat. So you can have creatine in your coffee, which is where we sneak it into my dad's coffee, Mum and I. Every morning I'm like, did you sneak it in? She's like, I did. And he feels great. And he just thinks it's the coffee. So it's amazing. So you can put it in your morning coffee. You can put it in your morning smoothie. You can put it in your water. It doesn't have any taste. Some of the myths around it is it causes hair loss. We've debunked that. It doesn't increase DHT, doesn't cause any kidney issues. There was a study done by Dr. Darren Kandel where he took women and he put them on a protocol of daily for 2 years, having, I think it was 12 grams of creatine per day. And he saw massive increases in bone mineral density and muscle mass, no bloating, no hair loss, no kidney issues.
If somebody is going to take the higher doses for the cognitive benefits, you mentioned 10 to 12 grams a day, is it beneficial to split that up in 2 or 3 doses and spread it out?
You can, or you don't have to. It just really depends on how you feel. You can't slap a label on something saying one size fits all. We're all different. If you feel like you are getting bloated or it's causing any type of gastrointestinal distress, maybe wean off it a little bit. Like, you have to listen to your body. For me, I actually have 5 grams a day, but if I've got a heavy cognitive load, for example, I'm writing a systematic review right now, which, let me tell you, is a marathon for your brain. There's around 3,000 articles that I've got to go through and write about, and there's a lot of cognitive load. On those days where I know I'm going to be reading for 12 hours a day, I'll have 12 grams. And I will separate that as well. 5 grams in the morning, 5 grams at around, 6 p.m. And if you're having it for the benefits of the gym, people generally ask, well, should I have it just before the gym? Or it really doesn't matter. The storage is the storage.
And if you forget it, say you're traveling, you don't bring it with you, do you notice a big difference on those days?
Oh, I'm known for being like prolific with my supplements. When I travel, you should see it. I never forget, but that's just me. But for the people that do, they do see a difference in how they feel, especially in terms of how well they're lifting and how heavy they're lifting.
Right. All right. You're a fan of electrolytes.
Oh, big fan.
Omegas.
Mm-hmm.
And creatine.
Yeah.
Anything else?
I have, I don't have the MTHFR gene. I've got nothing there in terms of methylation, but I am having a methylated form of B vitamins. B vitamins are great for the brain. I'm looking at my supplement stack right now. I'm having N-acetylcysteine, and I'm doing that. It's a precursor to glutathione. I did do a methylation test, and it showed that I had low glutathione, so I'm helping that in every way I can. One thing that I am doing, which is recent, I would say in the last 2 months, is I'm having turmeric. And turmeric or curcumin contains a molecule that can actually inhibit the NF-kappa B pathway. And this is a pathway that is produced during the inflammatory state. So it can actually really bring down inflammation. So I'm having that per day. I'm also having to counteract cortisol or these bouts of cortisol spikes during the day. I'm having rhodiola 3 times a day.
How do you feel about fasting for the brain and beyond?
Look, it's not my field. Do I do it? I think I do it accidentally. I don't mean to fast, but I pretty much have my last meal by 8:30 p.m. every night, and I don't have my first meal until around 11:30 a.m. Is that fasting?
I would say it's on a continuum, right? So it's somewhere in there.
Yeah. And look, we've seen some great results for patients with mild cognitive impairment. We've also seen great results for the ketogenic diet for neurodegenerative diseases.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure we went there. So we can't talk about diet, brain health without bringing ketones in, either through a ketogenic diet or supplementing with MCT oil or exogenous ketones. How do you feel about that in relation to brain health?
I like the aspect, this is not my field, but I like the aspect of bringing in exogenous ketones and living in that ketogenic state, because your brain actually utilizes lactate much better than glucose, even though glucose is the primary fuel source for the brain. So if we can deplete the glucose, use the ketones, then we're at a better state neuronally to produce energy and for the survival and growth of our neurons. There's also something that I was just thinking about, and that is your brain has this other, I always bring in like real life scenarios like compound interest. Your brain cells really have this notion of supply and demand, right? It's under so much demand every day, from work stress to environmental stress to phone notification stress. We're under stress. So it's got so much demand placed upon it. But if you have a lot of supply through ketones and supply through sleep and through exercise and through hydration, then you're going to be able to meet the demands. What happens is if we have no supply and we've got a lot of demand, that's when we experience that synaptic loss and that neurodegradation.
How do you feel about the situation where somebody has an increased supply and they have high blood glucose, high insulin? Over time, they build insulin resistance. Their metabolic health takes a downturn. The impact on the brain, and then again, we can tie this into, ketogenic, low carb, and reversing that and regaining metabolic health. And obviously, there's different ways of doing that through exercise and different ways, but diet is a powerful lever in that realm.
Yeah, diet is a very powerful lever in that realm. It really affects our brain. But you know what, Jesse, and this goes against probably many, many people. If I had to pick, if I had to pick one, well, what's the best protocol? I think exercise far outweighs a diet. And hear me out. It doesn't mean I'm telling you to go and eat all these ultra processed foods. And by the way, you said when supply exceeds the demand. I'm talking about good supply, right? I'm talking about like overeating these foods that end up giving us type 2 diabetes. When we look at the literature, I know that you can get away with mild disruptions in your diet, but you can't get away with not exercising. So exercise is fundamentally the most important tool that we have for staving off Alzheimer's disease. And then it goes to sleep, and then it goes into nutrition. That's why nutrition sits at the top of the pyramid.
A great way of tying some of this together with exercise, metabolic health, is putting on muscle mass. And this goes back to earlier in the conversation, making more muscle through resistance training and creating more of a glucose sink.
Yes.
Which is great for our metabolic health. And again, you can create a bigger sink for glucose, or you can change your diet and bring glucose down. So there's different levers that we can pull, and all of us are going to have ones that we gravitate more towards and have been successful with. So I think it's important to look at this as best we can comprehensively and give people different tools to look at.
Yeah, absolutely. You can think of muscle mass, and that's something that we didn't discuss earlier, as a glucose sink. When I was doing, back in 2020 during the pandemic, I had a lot of time on my hands, as probably we all did. I remember Casey and I just starting to experiment with this CGM. And so I put the CGM on, and I was looking at my glucose spikes from the foods that I ate. It turns out that my body just does not agree with grapes. So I don't think I've eaten a grape since. But I was looking at that and I was realizing that I have a really great postprandial spike. And that was because of how fit I was and the muscle mass that I have. But also, if you are going to eat something that is going to spike your glucose, or even after anything you eat, one of the best things I was doing to bring it down was I was going out of my apartment, going downstairs and running a really fast lap around the apartment. You would see like a dramatic, like you'd see the spike go really below. And that's because when you exercise, your muscles are just soaking in all of that glucose to use it for energy. So the more muscle mass you have, the better utilization of that glucose.
Early in the conversation, you brought up saunas, ice baths. I want to move into some of that periphery stuff here as we come to a close.
The
But
accessory
first,
items.
exactly. But first, let's make sure we didn't miss anything from the foundation, exercise, then moving up to sleep and diet. Any other big areas within those we want to cover before we get to the more detailed, arguably less important parts?
There's one thing to be said of exercise, and that is the neurocognitive involvement of exercise, which involves doing things that are going to stimulate your cognitive performances, irrespective of like running and cycling and weight training. And these involve things such as handball, racquetball, doing any type of like throwing the ball to the wall. What you're doing there is you're engaging your eyesight, your reaction time, your hand-eye coordination, things that we need to have a proper functioning brain. You know, the Academy of Neurology in the last 3 years actually put hearing loss as a risk factor for dementia. And that's one of our senses, right? So doing things that engage all the senses, smelling things, smelling different spices, listening to things, going out in nature, seeing things like from far away, doing hand-eye coordination drills. I love that. So, balancing, standing on one foot, you're going to activate the little area of your brain called the cerebellum, which is involved in balance and posture. So doing little things like that as well, I would definitely put that on the 5-minute a day neurocognitive bandwagon.
And as you share that, it gets me thinking about things like crosswords, different brain games you can now get on our phones and devices. How important of a piece is that for you when it comes to brain health?
People always ask me, but Louisa, I do Sudoku. It's like, but is it challenging you? You need novelty and you need challenge. It's just like your brain doesn't grow unless it's stimulated. So you need to be able to enforce it somehow. So if it's not hard, then it's probably not doing anything.
All right, let's move into saunas, and then we'll get into ice baths after. For somebody that wants to start doing everything they can to prevent dementia, Alzheimer's, how big of a piece would going into a sauna regularly be?
It's a big piece because you can get the elimination of these toxins. You can increase perfusion, increase nitric oxide, which is dilates the blood vessel to increase blood flow. It's really great for that. And in some aspects, these heat shock proteins can mimic cardiovascular activity. So it can be good for the heart, it can be good for the brain. It can be good for eliminating toxins from the body. I do know that for some, it can be time consuming, expensive. I'm definitely very well aware of that. That's why I call it an accessory item. But it really does, serve and protect the brain and body in many ways. The heat shock proteins we know can affect us at a DNA level. We've also seen that we can eliminate the aggregates of these tau proteins and the amyloid beta through getting into a hot state. We know that it's also challenging our mitochondria. So I love it for those purposes. Do I think it should outweigh exercise, sleep, and a proper diet? No.
The detox aspect of going in a sauna and sweating gets me thinking about being preventative in that realm and relating this to brain health, different toxins in the environment, whether it be water, food. We talked about food quality, air, cosmetics. We could go on. But as a brain expert, what are the biggest areas you look at when it comes to these insults on the brain?
So I generally like to do a screening. Like I'll look at heavy metals tests, right? Once we bring on a new client into the practice, like we'll look at absolutely everything. And if we see that they've got heavy metal exposure, they've got high BPA, right? We can now look at this. One of the ways that we're eliminating this is through the sauna. And the process of elimination of all of this that takes place in a sauna. One thing to also remember is that you want to be washing off the toxins with a specific soap called Castile soap. I actually have one for when I go into the saunas, because if you don't wash it off, you're actually going to seep the chemicals back into the body.
And how cognizant are you of filtering your water, filtering your shower water? Different environmental aspects, again, filtering air to try and provide your body with the least amount of insult and less to detoxify.
So funny you said that. I just ordered myself an air purifier. It's quite big, but it's going to purify the air in my apartment. I live in New York City. The second thing is, I am not, just because I rent my apartment right now, I haven't got one of the actual, what is the taps that you can get that can actually purify the water?
Well, for the sink, you can get an RO, reverse osmosis.
Yes.
And then
yes.
there's shower filters too that you can put on your shower before the shower head and filter that water as well.
Yeah.
When you get into it, there's so many different areas that fortunately there are ways of filtering, but unfortunately in the modern environment, there are so many things to think of to try and create the less amount of toxicity in our world as we can.
Yeah, so right now I'm not doing reverse osmosis, but I want to. And that'll probably come at my next place when I settle into it. But right now I am very bullish on glass, and I'm doing everything I can to eliminate plastic, everything I can. I'm actually probably going to go broke buying, Spring Valley bottles of glass water. And right now you can see me, I'm actually drinking from a Voss glass water. I generally try and do everything I can to eliminate that. And I know that it's crazy. We're at the mercy everywhere of these microplastics. And it's quite scary. We're doing an episode of this on my podcast, actually just dedicated to microplastics.
And there are so many different areas and could easily be dismissed as being, it's just a little bit here, a little bit there. But when you get to thinking throughout a day or
compound
a week or
interest.
Exactly. You can look at hair dye and makeup, and you mentioned the Castile soap. What products are you using on your body, and even clothing, and how synthetic a lot of the clothing is becoming. So I'm trying to keep all this related to brain health, but you can imagine on the body as a whole and the brain, the insult over a day, a week, a lifetime.
Yeah, absolutely. And basically what you're saying is we should all be living naked in the Amazon.
Or in a bubble.
Yeah, it's trust me. When I saw, and I was in London for 4 weeks. I only got back a week ago. That's when I first saw it. It was 4 weeks ago that the study came out to show that they have now found microplastics in the brain. That's when I was like, all right, do I live in the Amazon or do I live in Sardinia? Because this is just horrific. And I don't know if we can live in a world where we don't have any microplastics. I don't know if you've thought about that, but like, how would I actually live in that world? So it doesn't become about how do we completely eliminate it from our lives. It becomes about how can we just lessen the burden.
Yeah, I think it's a few different parts. Lessening, having good detox protocols, and then maintaining a healthy body overall so it can deal with these, and hopefully before they become problematic, expel them and have a strong immune system to be able to stand up to the current world we live in.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. And yeah, having a good way to eliminate that is huge.
You mentioned earlier blood-brain barrier. And as we're talking about insults on the body, it gets me thinking about that being a protective shield over the brain. Talk about the role of that and where things can go wrong.
Yeah, the blood-brain barrier is kind of like the bouncer at a club. It basically is there to tell you who can come in and who can't, right? And if you are in a healthy state, the blood-brain barrier is actually just a collection of cells, and they're bound together by tight junctions, kind of like this, right? But as we are exposed to stress, high glucose diet like type 2 diabetes, what happens is you can actually degrade the blood-brain barrier and it becomes permeable. So it basically, it becomes leaky, right? So you kind of open up, these gap junctions. And what happens then you actually allow for the passive diffusion of these large toxic molecules that can go into the brain. So we have to be able to protect the blood-brain barrier, which ultimately is protecting the blood vessels. When we look at the blood vessels as well, we have these little ones that are called capillaries, and they are 1 cell thick. And so they're pretty weak, but they do a lot of work. They supply the blood to different neurons in the brain. These are the first things to go in things such as hypertension, even mild spikes in blood pressure, not through exercise. I'm talking like if you've got actual high blood pressure and you're not maintaining it, really at the gold standard of 120/80, then you're at the mercy of breaking down and killing these tiny capillaries of the brain, which will then kill the blood-brain barrier, allowing for molecules that you don't want to go in there.
What would you recommend testing-wise? Somebody that's come to this conversation, they want to start being more cognizant of taking care of their brain, and they want to see their baseline where they're at now, and then likely further test down the line. So give us the basic package where they're going to get the most value, and then some of the more obscure tests that people won't necessarily need unless they have the money.
I want everybody to get an ApoE4 genetic test. This is the one of the risk genes that can increase your risk of getting Alzheimer's disease. I am in the bandwagon of I think everyone should know and understand their risk. And you don't know if you're at an increased risk of getting the disease. I don't think that should be the reason to have a healthy lifestyle. I think you should have it anyway. So I think that that's baseline. We should get that. Then you really want to get a blood test that's testing around 50 biomarkers in terms of like a full lipid panel, including your ApoB and Lp(a). Then you also want to be looking at, if you want to do a urine test, a test for any of your heavy metals or toxic metal exposures. In terms of other tests, I think everyone should do a VO2 max test. You can look at your local university, make sure it's from a reputable person who can help you in any way for that, because that's going to measure how fit you are, put you on a baseline, and then it's going to be able to extract the data to tell you whether you are in zone 1, zone 2, what are the heart rate metrics to stay in. And fourth one would probably be a DEXA scan, so you can measure how much muscle mass you have, bone mineral density, bone mass, and if there's any asymmetries in that.
With any of these aspects of health and well-being, or at least a lot of the time, I look at it from what are we taking in and what can we take in to accentuate health? And then what do we need to look at blocking? And as we're having a conversation about the mind and the brain and brain health, I get thinking about our go, stressful modern world, always connected, social media, on-demand TV, all these inputs that can be potentially used in a healthy way, but I feel like for a lot of people are out of hand and having a negative impact on the brain. So any research on things in that realm and how you look at protecting your brain from the overstimulation of these things?
Protecting your brain really comes down to setting standards for yourself, which is literally how much time do you want to spend on a phone? Is the phone serving you in any purpose? How much time do you want to spend inside? It's becoming really deliberate with it. I don't think we should be looking for what is the cure or what is the app that's going to minimize distractions. It's like, this exists. You can move away from it. You know what you have to do. Try and do that. Because you're also messing with which is not my forte, but I know that you're, through the ongoing use of social media, you're messing with the dopamine circuit, you're messing with the serotonin circuit, you're increasing your risk of cognitive decline in many ways. So I think just being smart, taking a logical approach, looking for well-cited information and education from experts that you trust, trusting their guidance, and getting about the business of actually doing that, because no one's here to save you. If you get this disease, there is no reversing it. There is no eliminating it. There is no curing it. Once you've got it, you've got it.
And then looking at that from the other perspective, one thing that comes to mind is connection with other people, community, friendships, family. And I get thinking about blue zone lifestyle and people living together, supporting each other. How do you look at that? And is there any research you've looked at in that community aspect and how that fosters brain health?
Yeah, there's a really wonderful Harvard study, 80-year follow-up study where they tracked and measured the highest quality of brain health over time. And they found that those who had good quality relationships are the ones who had greater brain health. So that's something that I've started to talk about a lot, the quality of your relationships. It doesn't mean romantic spouse relationships, doesn't just mean that. It also means the quality of your close relationships. And I really love that. It's something that it's a new, I've fostered all of my relationships, but it's something that I very much take seriously now and put effort into. So the quality of the relationships you have and the connections you have are really important. Back home in Australia, we had a very close family friend who used to help us and help my mum out. My mum worked full time as well, helped her out with the kids, and she's beautiful. And her name is Valerie. She is 96 years young. She drives. She's active. You can maintain conversation with her. She is unbelievable. And when you look at the lifestyle she leads, it's so fascinating. So she dances 3 times a week. She has such a great group of friends. They go on these excursions. Like every day she's like on a bus going somewhere. She cooks, she bakes, she's doing so much, and it shows. She is just, sometimes I pick her up when I go home. I take her for I'm having like these normal, and she walks. Like the fact that she drives is so incredible to me. The way she parks is a bit questionable, but like it does show you that how you use your brain and your mind throughout the years plays a massive role.
And things like that are more subjective and harder to measure and quantify within our own life, but doesn't necessarily mean that they're any less important.
No, exactly. Yeah, just because that's what I mean. But you think about this, right, Jesse? Think about what is it? Have you ever, this is a question for you, have you ever maybe had to say goodbye to a friend? Not in a bad way, but maybe thought, okay, I'm not going to hang out with that person as much anymore.
Definitely.
Yeah. And imagine
more and more as I get older and I'm more analytical of the people I'm spending time with and the value that we're providing each other. And it sounds very transactional, but certain people leave you feeling more full and other people leave you feeling more depleted. And as I get older, I'm more aware of that and make conscious decisions more who I'm spending time with.
Yeah, me too. And it doesn't mean that these people are bad people. But I'm figuring out that more and more. It's like when I leave a conversation, it's like, do I feel uplifted? Am I, how does my sympathetic nervous system feel around this person? Do I see them in my life at 90 years old, and are they adding anything? Like so you do really have to be strategic, especially I'm just thinking about my week. I was explaining to you like how much I have going on. I can't imagine if it was dampened, if I just have an hour in my week to spare, if it was dampened by a negative person, right? Or when somebody just puts all of their problems onto you. So that's what I've been really monitoring health-wise as well this week, this year.
One of the big conversations in the health and wellness space when it comes to the mind and the brain is the connection between that and the gut and the microbiome.
Mm.
How do you look at that? And that ties to, supplements, diet, really ties to a lot of different things. I'm sure stress impacts the microbiome.
Yeah.
But is that something that you consider when you're looking to help somebody optimize their mind and their brain?
Well, it's not my area. I'm very clear on sticking to my lane. What I do know, we do optimize that as well. I just have a team behind me that does that. But what I do know is that you've got 12 cranial nerves, and the 10th cranial nerve, which is the vagus nerve, extends from the brain and it goes into the gut. That's how we communicate with the gut. But the gut actually has, I think it's around 10 nerves that go from the gut up to the brain. And so it's this bi-directional communication axis. So we know that exists, the gut-brain axis. We know that a lot of the serotonin that we produce is produced in the gut. And so I myself know that when I eat terribly, which is not an it's a rare occurrence, but if I was to eat something, I know that it affects me mentally, physiologically. So there is something to be said in that aspect. I know there's a lot of ongoing research in there. It doesn't show up too much in the Alzheimer's disease space just yet, but I'm definitely keeping an eye out on it.
When you talk about how you eat there, it gets me thinking about specific foods that never make it onto your plate. Given what you know about the brain and taking care of your brain, there's a lot of talk these days in our world about seed oils, vegetable oils, processed foods. What are the things when it comes to brain health for yourself and people you're working with that are a definite no-go?
First and foremost is we don't allow anybody in our practice if you are smoking. So we've got a strong cigarette and drug policy, marijuana as well. The next step under that is elimination of alcohol. If you want to have a glass of wine every now and then, okay. But then, we don't. So things that don't make it on my plate are ultra processed foods. Thankfully, I wasn't brought up on this, so I don't feel like I need it. I'm not a sweet person in terms of cake, and I don't even know what people buy at bakeries. I see croissants and I don't eat that sort of food. The only bad thing I would say that makes it to me is I do have a chocolate craving, if you will. I do eat dark chocolate as well. Sometimes I eat milk chocolate. That's probably the worst thing that makes it to my plate. Other than that, I grow my own sprouts and mung beans. So I love sprouting. I cook almost every night. I love cooking. I bake my own bread, so I know that that's clean. As far as I've got the only oil I'm really ingesting is olive oil, and it's a really high quality purified one that comes out. If I forget the label, but it does come from California. I just brought some back from London as well. So I'm eating a very Mediterranean rich diet.
All right. You mentioned smoking and then marijuana. Talk about the impact of the latter on the brain.
Yeah, look, I put up a statement on Twitter that went viral probably about a year ago, and that said, I don't know who needs to hear this, but marijuana is not helping you sleep. I feel like a lot of people think it's helping them sleep, but it's actually just as toxic, if not more, than alcohol. And the reason I say that is because long-term use can really lead to schizophrenia, psychosis. I don't know where people are getting this from. I think we need to actually look at the behavior behind why you do anything. And behavior is what's going to drive the changes in your lifestyle, which is going to change the trajectory of your you get, all-cause mortality rate, really. So we have to understand first and foremost why you're engaging in these types of behaviors, why you drink, why you feel like you need marijuana in the first place. So it's very much detrimental to the brain and body. That doesn't mean that CBD is bad for the body. We've seen some, great results for pediatric epilepsy and CBD, and also activating the parasympathetic nervous system. I'm not talking about that. I'm actually talking about the THC part of the plant. That is the psychoactive part of the plant that is affecting our central nervous system.
All right. When I brought up saunas earlier, I mentioned ice baths.
Oh, yeah. We didn't go into that.
I know you're a fan.
Yeah.
I think you even have one at home.
In my apartment, correct?
Nice. Talk about, obviously, it's something if you're in New York in an apartment where space, I'm sure, is limited and you've allocated space to this, it's important to you. Talk about the benefits specifically when it comes to the brain.
Oh gosh, I love cold water immersion for many reasons. I think one of the greatest reasons is the mitochondrial biogenesis part, because what happens is when you are under an extreme hypothermic temperature, right? You're really, really cold. Your brain kind of says, okay, she's under attack. She's super cold. She's going to freeze to death. What do? We have to warm her up. So the mitochondria really get to work, right? So you're training the mitochondria. But then what else happens is your mitochondria is like, we don't have enough. We have to produce more. So you produce more mitochondria in the presence of cold water immersion. And this is generally like my protocol is getting in for 3 minutes, right? Because I think 3 minutes is a sweet spot. And I'm generally doing, I'm doing my ice baths at around 42 degrees Fahrenheit. It depends. It depends on how cold adapted you are. So that's one aspect of it. I also like the vasoconstriction aspect of it, where your blood vessels constrict. And what happens is you produce a robust amount of norepinephrine. So norepinephrine is both a neurochemical, a neurotransmitter, and a hormone, noradrenaline. And this is a neurotransmitter involved in vigilance and drive. And actually, it can actually be increased by 530% when you get into the water. I think that the ice bath actually is so interesting for people with ADHD, because if you pharmacologically deplete norepinephrine from an individual, they will become depressed, first and foremost. And in ADHD, people with ADHD, I should say, are often given norepinephrine reuptake inhibitors. So it can really help there, but it can also help with mild depression as well. So there's something to be said there. It can also increase your dopamine. So I think that's a really interesting feat of cold water immersion. One of the reasons why I do it almost every day. I do it in the winter. I do it in the summer. And it helps as well with my delayed onset muscle soreness.
Okay. And how often are you doing the sauna?
So I'm doing the sauna when I can get to it 2 times a week, because that's my weekend. If you can imagine me one day having a house, and just my dream is just to have all the sauna, the ice bath, all of my favorite exercise equipment just sitting there at my home. So then I eventually probably won't have to leave my house.
We'll talk about what that extra equipment could look like beyond, obviously, the sauna and the ice bath. What other things could somebody incorporate, these auxiliary biohacks, we'll call them, for the brain?
Oh gosh, depends on how much money you have, really. One thing that I'm getting into lately is hyperbaric oxygen therapy. So I'm heading to LA soon, and I have a friend there that owns Next Health, and he's got a wonderful chamber there. I think this is great. Again, another accessory item, but I think it's really great for post-stroke patients. It's great for increasing oxygenation to the brain. You're getting 100% oxygen. Who doesn't need that? And you really can do other things. You can be working on your laptop. And I know that people now are investing in these hyperbaric oxygen chambers in their house. I know it's expensive, but other things would include a weight rack, of course, if you can, sunlight, a happy environment. You don't have to go too fancy. Oh, and sorry, also red light therapy. So I've got a red light panel as well. My apartment's pretty much a lab, but I have a red light panel. If it was bigger, and to include this in my, I guess, in-home performance lab in the future, I would probably have one of those 360-degree panels where there's like 2 or 3 full body panels. Really great research in there. I've even got a handheld panel that I use on my face. great research for pain, but even greater research to show that it penetrates the superficial organs of the body. It can stimulate collagen production in the skin. It can really help with eyesight. So I love red light therapy, and I think that that's either even in experimenting on stroke patients intranasally, putting red light through your nose for it to seep up into the brain and helping the brain in that aspect as well. That's very new research, but I think there's going to be tons of research in the future on red light panels.
Earlier, when we were talking about reversal, I forget how you worded it, but it sounded like, at least when we're at this stage of Alzheimer's, there's no reversal there. So we want to be proactive and preventative. But for somebody who is somewhere along that continuum, say they're just starting to have mild cognitive decline and go all the way to Alzheimer's, and they start applying a lot of what we talked about today, how much reversal have you seen?
Look, you have to. I wouldn't say the word reversal. And I know a wonderful physician, Dr. Dale Bredesen, is really doing a lot in that aspect. From my take, what you need to be doing is, instead of thinking about reversal, because that takes a lot of time, money, effort, a lot of support, think about slowing the progression. So instead of thinking, I want to reverse or slow the progression, instead of, if you've got mild cognitive impairment and let's just say you're set to get Alzheimer's disease in 20 years, why not try and slow the progression and say to yourself, but I could get Alzheimer's disease in 40 years instead if I engage in these lifestyle factors. What we also know, Jesse, is that around 95% of the current Alzheimer's disease patients across a spectrum got there through lifestyle habits rather than genetic. So if you have to think of this from an epigenetic perspective, just think that everything you do, every choice you make every day is changing your epigenetics, and it can either be for the good or for the bad. And with Alzheimer's disease, we know that a strong component is really reliant upon the lifestyle habits that you engage in every day.
All right, I hear you. I agree with you. But for that person who has a family member that is moderate to severe decline in cognition, have you seen anybody even a little bit come back the other way?
Yeah, and that's definitely through maintaining a low inflammatory state. So we really want to get, and I do have, trust me, I just brought on somebody new, high profile in the last week. And we're doing a lot to have a look and assess his where they're sitting in terms of mild cognitive impairment across the spectrum. And I'm going to be doing the protocols of literally taking the protocol of how can we eliminate inflammation, the amount of inflammation that is circulating through your body, because we know that we need to downregulate as much inflammation as possible in order to achieve this reversal state. Not that I really entirely agree with that.
Right. But I want to be realistic. I don't want to push you into saying something you're not comfortable with, but I want people who have tuned into this point, and likely it'll be a lot of family members who have somebody who is suffering. I want to be realistic, but give them the hope, if it's there, that if they want to take this on and do what we're saying here, that there's at least potential for them to regain some of their cognition.
And you can through various lifestyle factors and through the foods you eat. I would definitely, the first thing I would say is, okay, great. You got to really get your sleep underway. Like, how's your sleep? Fix that first and foremost. Second thing is try and get on a ketogenic diet ASAP to try and utilize ketones as fuel. The third thing I would say is really engaging in the neurocognitive work to bring back the synapses. Start putting your brain under mild stress so it grows back and the synapses, you regain the executive functions. After that, really try and eliminate the toxic exposure that you have, whether that's through supplementation, whether that's through going into the sauna as much as you can. That's what I would recommend. Whether you're going to get a benefit from that, I don't know. We've seen patients that have that we've seen people, I should say, that have a head full of amyloid beta, but they don't get cognitive impairment. So
that second last step there, is that where people are working on hand-eye coordination activities?
Correct. Yeah.
And go over, I know you touched on this before, but go over what a couple of the most simple ones would be.
Yeah, you want to be getting a tennis ball, right? Really simple. And start throwing the ball to the wall. Maybe sticking to right-handed ball throws, left-handed ball throws, standing on one leg. Even one thing that I love doing is going to CVS, pretty cheap, getting an eye patch, putting on your eye, which is literally blacking out half of your brain, and just throwing the ball to the wall like that. Great partner exercises. I get my parents to throw the ball to each other, bounce the ball, do whatever you can to increase your hand-eye coordination and your reaction time to things.
Amazing. Louisa, really enjoyed the conversation. I appreciate you and all the work you're putting out into the world. We're going to link up your website, your social media, everything in the show notes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jesse. Thank you for what you do, and thanks for having me.
Now that you're done, you're going to want to stick around here and catch this other incredible episode. You don't want to miss it. I'll see you over there.
If you've got PTSD, ADHD, OCD, eating disorders, early dementia, whatever the issue is, I will try to help you. My definition of a brain healthy diet is it has to nourish the brain, protect the brain, energize the brain. You can see dramatic